She pressed her cheek against the cold stock of the rifle, steadying her breath. The roar of war was everywhere, mortars booming in the distance, rifles cracking against metal, boots pounding across broken streets. And yet for her it blurred into something else. Background noise. A low hum. A kind of static she had learned to silence in her mind. What she carved out instead was stillness. A fragile silence between heartbeats. The space where the world narrowed to one scope, one breath, one choice. But even here, lying prone on a rooftop that smelled of dust and gunpowder, she felt it. The tremor beneath her calm. The storm inside that refused to settle. Her finger hovered near the trigger, not yet touching it, not yet surrendering to what it meant. She knew the weight of that moment better than most. To squeeze too soon was as dangerous as waiting too long. Patience wasn't just a skill here, it was survival. And still, she could feel the old ache rising in her chest. The memory of the one time she hadn't waited. The one mistake that replayed in her head during the quiet hours. The face she couldn't unsee. The others didn't know. Not yet. They thought she was here like them, another soldier following orders, part of a machine. But she carried something they couldn't name. A silence that didn't come from discipline but from guilt, from loss. And tonight, that silence would be tested again. Earlier, at the briefing table, she'd been invisible. The room smelled of stale coffee and sweat, the overhead projector buzzing against cracked plaster walls. A map was taped across the board, covered in red and yellow markers. Enemy strongholds, fallback routes, lines they couldn't afford to cross. She sat straight-backed at the end of the table, her uniform crisp, her boots still caked with dust from the last patrol. Her eyes stayed locked on the map, but she felt the weight of the room. The way the commander never met her gaze. The way some of the others leaned back, arms folded, waiting to hear where they'd be sent, certain she wouldn't be sent anywhere important. Warren, you've got the east. The commander's finger jabbed at the map. Doyle, cover the south flank. Ramirez, you're with me. And then the pause, a hesitation that lasted longer than it should have. Finally, as if he remembered she existed, Monroe, rooftop overwatch, don't fire unless necessary. The words hit sharper than intended. Don't fire unless necessary. It wasn't strategy, it was doubt, dressed up as caution. She didn't flinch, didn't challenge. She sat silent, letting the order settle. Silence had always been her shield, but inside something knotted tight in her stomach. This wasn't the first time she'd been dismissed, and it wouldn't be the last, but it carved at her anyway, because she knew something they didn't. She wasn't just here to follow orders. She had her own reason for climbing that rooftop. Now, lying low against cracked concrete, she scanned the alley below through her scope. Dust rose in spirals from the rubble, curling in the late light like smoke from a dying fire. Her world shrank to details. A door slightly ajar, creaking in the wind. A tin can rolling across broken pavement. The faint sway of curtains in a shattered window. Her old instructor's voice came back, like a ghost in her ear. Stillness is louder than chaos, Monroe. You listen for what's missing, not what's there. So she listened. The gunfire in the distance was expected. The shouts, the boots, the sound of bricks collapsing, all part of the noise. What she searched for was the absence, the silence that betrayed intent. And there it was. A man stepping carefully across broken glass, moving with intent. His shoulders tucked in, his steps too precise to be random. Not a civilian scrambling for safety. Not a wanderer. This was training, purpose. Her breath slowed. Her finger edged closer to the trigger, brushing the cool metal. She had him. She could end it here. But something froze her. The way his head tilted once, slightly, unnervingly. Not like a man checking his path, more like a man acknowledging he was being watched. Her chest tightened. She pulled back from the scope, blinked, then looked again. Gone. Just like that. Her earpiece crackled. Monroe, report, Warren's voice laced with impatience. Her jaw clenched. She could tell them, she could warn them, but she pictured the commander's eyes at the briefing table, the weight of "don't fire unless necessary." If she said it now, they'd dismiss it. They always did. So she swallowed, negative, all clear. A pause, static, then nothing. She lowered her head back to the rifle, scanning again, slower this time, searching for what her gut told her was still there. And for a heartbeat, she thought she saw it. Another glint, the faintest reflection, like her own eyes staring back through a second scope. Her pulse thudded in her ears. Then it was gone again. The firefight picked up later, not directly where she'd seen the figure, but close enough to leave doubt gnawing at her. The squad fought hard, scattered bursts of gunfire cracking across the night. From above, she tracked what she could, covering angles, holding fire when her sights weren't clean. When the chaos ebbed, they regrouped in the hollowed shell of a building. The ceiling sagged, walls pockmarked by rounds. The men lit cigarettes, passed around pieces of rations like small victories. She stayed at the edge, rifle across her lap, knees drawn up. Ramirez noticed. He always did. He tore a granola bar in half, held a piece out with a grin. "Here, can't have you fatting on us." She hesitated, then took it. Not because she was hungry, but because sometimes refusing kindness built walls she couldn't afford. "Crazy day," he said. "Thought we were toast when those guys pushed through the east. Good thing Doyle caught it." She nodded, chewing quietly. But her throat tightened with unspoken words. She wanted to tell him about the man, about the silence that didn't fit, about the tilt of that head, the reflection in glass. But the words stuck. Because what if she was wrong again? So she stayed quiet and told herself tomorrow she'd know for sure. Sleep never came easy here, but that night it was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, moving lightly across glass, tilting his head like he knew her. And underneath that vision, another surfaced. A younger version of herself on a different rooftop, hands sweating against a rifle she wasn't ready to hold, breath too fast, finger pulling the trigger too soon. And the body that fell hadn't been an enemy. Her stomach clenched. She pressed her palms to her eyes, trying to push the memory back down where it belonged. But guilt had teeth. It bit harder when you tried to bury it. Around her the others slept. Ramirez's breath soft, Doyle mumbling in his dreams. Even Warren, restless during the day, finally quiet. She stayed awake, her mind replaying both memories at once. The man in the alley, the mistake from years ago, the question of which would haunt her tomorrow. Because she knew he'd be back. The silence didn't lie. And when he returned, she couldn't afford to miss. Not too soon. Not too late. But exactly in the one heartbeat that mattered. Why had she stayed awake all night when exhaustion threatened to crush her? The others had managed to rest, however fitfully, their bodies forcing themselves into uneasy sleep. But she couldn't. Her mind was locked on that silence she had heard, that figure in the alley who had disappeared too cleanly. By dawn, her eyes burned, but her hands were steady. They always were, even when the rest of her was. The squad prepared in muted ritual. Boots laced, gear checked, weapons cleaned with quiet efficiency. No one talked much in the morning. Words wasted energy, and energy was the only currency worth saving out here. Still, she noticed the glances. Doyle's half-smirk when she adjusted her scope. Warren's raised brow when she pulled her gloves tight. The unspoken skepticism threaded through every look. Ramirez was different. He never said much either, but he didn't dismiss her. His kindness was quiet, passing rations, sharing cover, subtle nods when she took her position without complaint. He didn't have to speak it aloud for her to know. He trusted her more than the others did. And that mattered, more than she would admit. The day's assignment was simple on paper. Advance 2 blocks, secure an intersection, hold until further orders. Simple words for something soaked in danger. The streets ahead were unpredictable. Corners turned into choke points, windows into sniper nests. She took her place high again, rooftop overwatch, the position that left her alone with her doubts and her memories. From above, she could see the squad move below, silhouettes against the pale morning light, rifles raised, careful steps over broken concrete. Her scope swept the windows, the alleys, the rooftops opposite her own. She was searching for movement, but also for something else. That same feeling she'd had yesterday, that silence out of place. Minutes dragged into hours. The squad made progress, clearing one building, then another. The tension in her chest eased slightly. Maybe she'd been wrong. Maybe the figure had just been a shadow her mind invented, a trick of exhaustion. But then the stillness returned. A window 2 buildings down where curtains fluttered too deliberately. She froze, tightening her focus. The curtain stilled. A shadow lingered just beyond. Her pulse quickened. Warren, east window, 2nd floor, 2 buildings down, she murmured into her comms. Copy, Warren replied, his voice tight. He signaled Ramirez, who adjusted position. Seconds stretched, nothing happened. The window remained still, empty. Negative visual, Warren said finally. She could hear the skepticism in his tone. Monroe, you seeing ghosts again? Her jaw tightened. She wanted to snap back, to tell him the difference between paranoia and instinct, but the words caught. Copy, she said instead. She lowered her scope slightly, but her chest burned with frustration. Was she seeing ghosts? Or was she the only one paying attention? The day wore on. Heat pressed against her skin, sweat gathering beneath her vest. Every sound carried weight. A can rolling across the street, a bird taking flight too suddenly. Each noise sharpened her nerves. And still nothing. No ambush, no figure, no gunfire from that window. When dusk fell, the squad retreated to shelter. Another ruined building, walls peppered with bullet holes, the roof half caved. The mood was lighter than the night before. No firefight today. No casualties. Relief crept into their voices, their laughter brittle but real. She sat apart again, her rifle across her knees. Still didn't fire a shot, huh? Doyle said, half joking, half accusing. Must be nice, sitting pretty while the rest of us sweated out. The others chuckled. Even Warren cracked a grin. She didn't rise to it. Silence again was her armor. But Ramirez shot Doyle a look. You'd rather she waste ammo on shadows. Let her do her job. If something comes, we'll be glad she's up there. The laughter faded. Doyle shrugged, muttering something under his breath, but he let it go. She met Ramirez's eyes briefly, grateful though she didn't say it. He gave a small nod like he understood. That night she dreamed. Not of the man in the alley, not of the window with the still curtains, but of the mistake. It always came the same way. The rooftop years ago, her finger pulling too soon, the figure crumpling into dust. And then when she climbed down to confirm the kill, the truth tearing her apart. It hadn't been the enemy. It had been a boy, younger than her at the time, carrying nothing but a bag of bread. She woke with her heart hammering, breath sharp in her chest. The dream had replayed countless times, but it never dulled. And now, lying in the ruins of another city, she knew why it haunted her so much now. Because this silence, this figure she kept sensing, it felt tied to that moment. Like fate was circling back, demanding she face it again. She didn't know how, not yet, but she felt it. Tomorrow, she told herself, tomorrow the silence would break. Morning came with a haze of dust in the air. The squad moved out again, routine taking over. They swept buildings, checked streets, marked cleared ground with spray paint. She returned to her rooftop, the vantage point, the place of stillness. The city stretched before her, broken but not empty. Life existed here, somewhere beneath the rubble. She saw it in flashes, a woman darting between alleys with a child's hand in hers, an old man pulling a cart, a dog weaving through debris. She reminded herself of them always, that this wasn't just about targets, it was about protecting what was left. Her scope caught motion again. Same window as before. Curtains, stillness. Her stomach nodded. She focused, breath held. Then a flash, the unmistakable reflection of glass catching light. A scope. Contact, she hissed. But even as the word left her lips, the shot rang out. Not from her. From them. Below, Ramirez stumbled, clutching his shoulder as he dropped to cover. The comms erupted. Shouts, panic, orders clashing over one another. Her blood ran cold. She had seen it. She had warned them. And yet she hadn't fired. Her finger trembled against the trigger. Too soon, too late. She pulled in a breath, steadied her scope, and found the window again. Empty. The shooter was gone. The squad pulled Ramirez back, his arm bleeding but not fatal. He winced through the pain, still trying to wave off help. I'm fine, just a scratch. But she knew better. That wasn't just a scratch, that was a message. They were being watched, stalked, played. And she was part of the game, whether the others admitted it or not. Her silence wasn't enough anymore. Tomorrow she would break it. Why did his blood on the street feel heavier than any wound she had ever carried? Ramirez was alive, but the image wouldn't leave her. The way he stumbled, the shock in his eyes as he went down, the red seeping through his sleeve. She'd seen worse, much worse, and yet this struck deeper. Because she knew. She had seen the shooter first, she had called it, and still she hadn't fired. The others didn't blame her, not out loud. They were too focused on dragging Ramirez back, patching him up, swearing into the comms as command barked useless instructions. But the looks were enough. Quick, sharp, unspoken. You saw it, why didn't you stop it? She asked herself the same thing. They regrouped in a different building, one with sturdier walls, a roof that hadn't caved. Ramirez sat against a wall while Doyle wrapped gauze around his arm. He gritted his teeth but stayed quiet, sweat shining on his forehead. Not deep, Doyle muttered. Clean through, he'll live. Ramirez managed a crooked grin. Told you, just a scratch. But his eyes flicked toward her for half a second too long. She caught it. The question he didn't ask. Warren, on the other hand, didn't bother with silence. How the hell did he get a shot off at all? You were supposed to cover us. His words were blunt, sharp-edged. Her jaw clenched. She wanted to explain, to lay it out, the curtain, the shadow, the scope's glint, but all that would sound like excuses now. She simply said, I saw him, I called it. He was gone before I had a shot. Gone, Warren scoffed. Snipers don't just vanish, Monroe. The room went quiet. Ramirez broke it. He's not wrong. Whoever that was, they're good. The words landed like lead, because Ramirez wasn't accusing, he was warning. Whoever was hunting them wasn't sloppy. He was deliberate, skilled, patient. Like her. Later, when the squad settled into uneasy rest, she climbed higher onto the roof. The city stretched before her, scarred and hollow. The sky was bruised with dusk, the air heavy with dust and smoke. She lowered herself to the same prone position, cheek to stock, eyes through scope. Not because she expected to see him again tonight, but because she needed the silence. The hum of war below became background noise once more. The stillness sharpened, and with it memories pressed in. Her father's voice, low and steady when she was a child. Don't ever mistake silence for safety, Lee. Sometimes silence is the most dangerous sound of all. Her mother's hands on her shoulders before her first deployment, the worry she had hidden beneath a smile. Come back whole, not just alive, whole. She had broken both promises. She had mistaken silence before, and she hadn't come back whole. Sleep didn't come. When her eyes closed, she was back on that earlier rooftop, younger, less steady, desperate to prove herself. She remembered the moment too clearly. The boy's outline in her scope, the nervous breath, the trigger pull, the shock when his body crumpled, bread scattering from his bag. Her commander's voice afterward, flat and merciless. You hesitated in training. You rushed in combat. People die when you can't tell the difference. That had been her lesson, and it had never left. She opened her eyes, staring at the broken skyline. The silence pressed against her ears. She wasn't imagining it now. The figure was real. He had already drawn blood. And he was playing with her. The next morning, command pushed them forward again. Same orders, different street. Secure, hold, wait. She returned to Overwatch, her rifle heavier than usual. Her body felt sluggish, worn from lack of sleep, but her hands stayed steady. The squad moved below, shadows against the sunlit rubble. She scanned rooftops, alleys, windows. Everywhere. And nowhere. Hours passed. Nothing, no shots, no sign. The city mocked her with silence. Until she saw it. Not a man this time. A reflection, brief, sharp, not from a weapon, from a mirror. Held deliberately out a window. Her breath caught. He was signaling her. Not the squad, not command, her. Her hands tightened around the rifle. She didn't move, didn't fire. What did it mean? A taunt, a challenge, a warning. She couldn't answer, not yet. So she held still, scope locked, breath measured. And after a few long seconds, the mirror withdrew. The window closed. That night she sat against the wall while the squad muttered among themselves. Ramirez's arm was bandaged, his face pale but determined. Warren was restless, packing. Doyle leaned against a corner, smoking. The tension in the room was thick. Everyone felt it now, the presence out there, watching them, the silence before the shot. She stayed quiet until Ramirez spoke. Whoever's out there, they're not just trying to kill us, they're studying us. The words drew stares. What the hell are you talking about? Warren demanded. Ramirez shrugged with his good shoulder. Think about it. He could have aimed for the head. He didn't. He hit my arm. He wanted to wound, not kill. He wanted us to know he's there. The silence grew heavier. Warren scoffed, but the unease was in his eyes. Great. We've got a ghost sniper on our hands. Perfect. Doyle muttered. Or maybe Monroe's been seeing him all along. All eyes turned to her. She didn't look away. He's real, she said quietly, and he knows what he's doing. Her voice didn't shake, and that made them listen, even if they didn't want to. Later, alone, Ramirez approached her. His face was drawn, his voice low. You saw him before I got hit, didn't you? She hesitated, then nodded. Why didn't you take the shot? His tone wasn't accusing, it was curious, almost gentle. She swallowed. The words sat heavy in her chest. She wanted to tell him everything, the boy, the mistake, the guilt that chained her every time she looked through a scope. Instead, she said, because I wasn't sure. Ramirez studied her for a moment. Then he nodded as if that answer was enough. Then next time, be sure. He walked away, leaving her with the weight of his words. Sleep refused her again. When her eyes closed, she saw not just the boy, but Ramirez too, both falling, both bleeding, both because of her hesitation, her doubt, her silence. She pressed her palms against her temples, whispering to herself, be sure, be sure, be sure. The city outside was silent. Too silent. And she knew. Tomorrow, the ghost wouldn't just test her. Tomorrow, he would force her to choose. Why was he watching her so closely? She could feel his eyes on her through the dim glow of the portable lamp, every time she glanced down at the maps. Captain Rourke. He hadn't said a word since she'd entered the tent, but silence often meant more than questions. Silence could strip you bare. She drew in a slow breath, pretending not to notice, pretending his stare wasn't burning through the mask she'd perfected for years. Calm, detached, unshaken. That's what they expected of her. That's the only way they trusted her finger on the trigger. But tonight her hand betrayed her, a slight tremor when she traced the coordinates. She pulled it back fast, curling her fingers into a fist before anyone else noticed, except him. She knew he did. No one here knew why her hands shook when night fell. No one knew what ghosts walked into the tent when the lamps were lit and shadows leaned long across canvas. Not yet. Are you clear on your position? Rourke's voice finally cut in, low and unyielding. She looked up, her expression steady now, clear. His eyes lingered, searching for something: doubt, fear, hesitation. Whatever it was, he didn't find it, or maybe he just gave up. He shifted his gaze to the map and moved his finger across the valley ridge. We'll insert you here. Extraction window is tight. If they discover you, we won't be able to reach you in time. That part wasn't news. She lived in the spaces where in time didn't exist. Her focus wasn't on the map anymore. It was on the rhythm of his words. The way he avoided saying what everyone else thought, that she might not come back, that this was more of a wager than a plan. She'd been a bet before. She knew the odds. Outside the tent, the night pressed heavy. Cold wind moved through the camp, rattling metal frames and tugging at tarps. Somewhere, a soldier cursed softly under his breath. Somewhere else, laughter sparked from a fire too small to warm the bones gathered around it. It struck her how war created pockets of strange humanity. A laugh here, a card game there, someone quietly humming a song into the dark. Little rebellions against fear. She used to join in. Once. Now she carried her rebellion in silence. In the stillness she carved out while others tried to forget the noise. "Move out at 200, Rourke said. Her throat tightened at the sound of the hour. The same hour. She let it pass, exhaling without a word, and rolled the map closed. The hum of the Black Hawk wrapped around her as she sat near the door, rifle cradled tight against her chest. She always took the door seat. She liked the rush of cold air, the way it hit her face and kept her awake. She liked knowing that if anything happened, she'd be first to see it, first to act. The crew chief shouted something over the headsets, but her mind slipped elsewhere, back to her brother's voice. 12 years old, trying to sound like a man. "Promise me you'll come back this time," she had. She always promised, and every time it felt more like a lie. She hated herself for that, hated how promises turned brittle in her mouth. The helicopter dipped low, hugging the valley's contours. Below, jagged rock gave way to forest, shadows swallowing the ground in restless shapes. The pilot muttered coordinates. Her insertion point was close. She pressed her cheek briefly against the stock of her rifle, closing her eyes. That simple touch steadied her, reminded her that she was still here. Flesh, bone, breath, not just memory. When the bird flared and the crew chief gave the signal, she was already moving. Boots hit dirt. The roar of the rotors lifted away, leaving her in a silence so sudden it rang in her ears. The valley air was colder here, sharper. She crouched, adjusting to the night. The terrain stretched wide around her, boulders, ridges, the faint shimmer of frost clinging to low brush. And far off, like a wound in the dark, the faint orange glow of enemy fires. She was alone, the way they needed her to be. Hours passed in fragments, the scrape of her boots against rock, the slow count of her breaths, the endless patience of the hunt. She found her perch before dawn, a ridge that overlooked the valley and the compound beyond, the place where everything would unfold. She settled into it, adjusting the rifle with careful precision. She built her nest of stillness, stone and shadow wrapping around her like armor. Her heartbeat slowed, her mind emptied. And then her eyes locked on movement in the distance. Figures, shadows, soldiers at the compound gate. But that wasn't what made her stomach twist. It was the boy. She hadn't expected children here. His small frame, carrying a bundle of firewood, moving clumsily in the half-light. He stumbled once, and one of the guards barked at him, striking the air with a hand that stopped just short of his head. Her fingers tightened on the rifle, breath caught in her throat. She thought of her brother again, thought of promises, thought of how war never drew clean lines, how innocence bled into targets, how nothing ever fit into the neat categories written on briefing slides. Her scope shifted. The guard, the boy, back to the guard, back to the boy. Her mission was to wait. Her mission was to hold. But missions didn't account for the quiet wars that clawed inside you when no one was watching. The radio crackled softly in her ear. Confirm visual. She hesitated just for a beat too long. Confirmed. Her voice sounded steady, but her chest burned. By midday, the compound pulsed with life. Vehicles rolled in. Men moved in and out. Orders barked in a language she didn't fully understand but could read well enough in tone. Something was happening, something bigger than they'd predicted. She reported in, every detail precise, but there was something she didn't tell them. Not yet. She hadn't told them about the boy. The silence after her updates always carried weight. Command trusted her reports without question, trusted her silence even more, but silence had a cost. As the sun dipped, painting the sky with fractured red light, she knew the moment was coming, the one that would demand more than skill, the one that would tear open what she'd been trying so hard to keep closed. Her finger brushed the trigger lightly, almost a caress. Her breath steadied. The roar of war was still out there, far beyond this valley, but here, inside her scope, there was only stillness, the kind of stillness she alone could carve into the scene. And this time, she wasn't sure if it would save her or destroy her. Why did the boy keep coming back to the gate? The question wouldn't leave her. All morning her scope had tracked him, his small frame weaving in and out of the compound, each time carrying something different. A bucket of water, a bundle of wood, once food. The guards barked at him, shoved him, but never enough to push him away. He always returned, always carried on. And she hated that it reminded her of herself. She shifted her weight slightly, stone pressing into her elbow where it dug against the ridge. Hours in one position demanded a kind of devotion most people couldn't imagine. But the ache in her muscles wasn't what gnawed at her. It was the ache of memory. Her brother had been stubborn like that boy, always coming back, always trying no matter how many times the world shoved him aside. He wanted to follow her into the military. She told him no, told him he wasn't cut for it, told him to stay away from the path that had already stolen too much from them. But she remembered the way his face fell when she said it, how his silence afterward carried the weight of something broken. She hadn't meant to crush him, she just didn't want to lose him. The boy stumbled again near the gate, and the guard finally struck him across the back. Not hard enough to cripple, but enough to make him flinch. Her hand moved without thought, rifle steady, finger brushing the trigger. One breath and she could erase the guard from the scene. One breath and the boy would be safe for now. But orders were clear. Targets weren't to be engaged until command gave the word. She forced her finger away, jaw tightening. Not yet, she whispered to herself, the words a chain she wrapped around her own instinct. The radio crackled in her ear. Status. Eyes on compound, she replied. Her voice was calm, clipped, professional, the opposite of what churned inside her. Movement increasing, reinforcements arriving. Copy, stand by. Stand by, always stand by. As the hours passed, the compound swelled with activity. Trucks rolled in. Men disembarked with crates and weapons. Conversations buzzed in harsh tones. She adjusted her scope again and again, keeping count, building the picture. At least 30 by now, maybe more. But what made her chest tighten wasn't the men. It was the sound that slipped faintly through the wind, the cry of another child, this time from inside the walls. She froze, adjusted the focus. And there she was, a little girl no older than 6, clinging to a tattered doll. She walked beside the boy, eyes wide and hollow, her small steps unsteady. He kept glancing at her, like he was trying to shield her with nothing but his thin body. Her breath hitched. The memory came fast and uninvited. Her brother years ago when the world still felt whole. He'd held her hand like that once when their parents' voices rose in the other room, when breaking glass and slammed doors turned the night into something terrifying. He pulled her close and whispered, "Don't listen, just stay with me." She blinked, forcing the past back down, but the weight of it clung to her. War didn't stop at soldiers, it bled into families. into children, into futures that never got to begin. She knew that. She lived that. And yet here she was again, crosshairs tracing innocence caught in a battlefield. By late afternoon, the sky shifted, clouds pulling heavy across the horizon, dimming the valley. A storm was building. She welcomed it. Storms gave cover. Storms muffled sound. Storms turned the predictable into chaos, and chaos was something she could use. But chaos also bred mistakes. Her radio came alive again. Be advised, aerial confirms high-value target on site. Prepare for strike window. Her pulse quickened, so it was true. The whispers were right, he was here. The man she'd been sent to watch for. The one they'd said never stayed in one place for long. The one whose capture or death could tilt the balance of the region. She steadied her rifle, shifting focus. And then she saw him. The high-value target, surrounded by guards, moving with the confidence of someone untouchable. He stepped into the courtyard, barking orders, gesturing with sharp movements. Her finger hovered again. She could take him right now, one shot. But her mission wasn't to fire unless ordered. Her mission was to observe, to confirm, to hold until the operation fully converged. And yet, what if this was the only chance? What if waiting meant losing him forever? Her chest burned with the weight of choice. She whispered to herself, steady and slow, "Discipline is survival." It was a mantra drilled into her. A mantra she'd clung to in the moments when instinct screamed louder than orders. But instinct had a face now, two faces, a boy and a girl. Her scope tracked back to them. The boy still carried loads too heavy for his frame. The girl still clutched her doll, eyes darting like a trapped bird. And for the first time, she wondered if discipline and survival weren't the same thing anymore. Maybe survival, real survival, meant something else, something harder. The storm cracked in the distance, thunder rolling low. Shadows deepened across the valley. The radio voice cut sharp. "Stand by for green light. Repeat, stand by for green light." Her breath shuddered out. Stand by, always stand by. Night came fast, clouds swallowing the last glow of dusk. The compound lit with artificial light, lanterns, spotlights, fires. Men moved like restless ants preparing for something. Her world narrowed to the circle of glass in front of her eye, every detail amplified, every sound etched sharp. The thud of boots, the clang of metal, the faint cry of the girl again carried through the night air. She swallowed hard, focus, focus. Her finger brushed the trigger again almost unconsciously, not at the target, not at the guards, but hovering between two impossible paths. What was she doing here? A soldier, a sniper, a weapon honed for precision and restraint, but also someone's sister, someone's daughter, someone who once promised a boy she'd come back. The lines blurred until she wasn't sure where one ended and the other began. She thought of her brother's face the day she deployed last, the way he didn't say goodbye, the way he just stood there silent like he knew something she didn't. She carried that silence with her still. The thunder cracked again, louder this time, closer. And then her earpiece came alive. "Green light, execute, I repeat, green light." Her body froze, breath locked in her lungs. "Green light." The words pounded in her head. The moment had come. The target was in her scope. Everything she'd trained for, everything she'd sacrificed, everything she'd held inside, it all led here. But in the corner of her vision, the boy stumbled again. The girl clung tighter to her doll. Two futures collided in her sightline, one sanctioned, one forbidden. Her finger tightened on the trigger. And she whispered, almost too softly to hear, "Not yet." Why hadn't she fired? The question pressed against her chest like a weight, heavier than the rifle she cradled. The order had come. The green light was clear. Her finger had found the trigger, yet the shot never left her barrel. In the silence that followed, her earpiece hissed softly. Static, voices muffled by distance. She waited for someone to demand an explanation, for command to bark at her, to curse her hesitation. But no reprimand came. Not yet. The compound below carried on, unaware that its fate had hung on the pull of her finger. Men moved. Lights flickered. The target barked more orders, gesturing like a conductor in his own orchestra of war. And still her scope drifted back to the boy, back to the girl. Her breath shuddered. The rifle felt suddenly heavier, her body sinking deeper into the stone beneath her. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "What's wrong with me?" The storm broke not long after. Rain lashed against the ridge, cold and sharp, seeping into her uniform. Water slid down her scope, distorting the image until she wiped it clean with gloved fingers. The storm gave her cover, but also cover to them. Movement below blurred, figures shifting like ghosts through haze and shadow. She adjusted her position, heart pounding faster with every lightning flash that lit the compound in stark relief. The radio crackled again. "Status, confirmed shot." Her chest clenched. She had seconds to answer, seconds to decide whether to admit her defiance or craft a lie. Her voice came steady, though her heart hammered. "Negative. Target moved under cover before shot confirmed. Stand by for reacquire." The silence that followed cut deeper than any accusation. She could almost feel the weight of command's doubt pressing against her skin. Finally, a clipped reply, "Copy, maintain position." She exhaled, slow relief mingling with dread. She bought herself time, nothing more. Hours bled into night. Rain softened, leaving the air heavy and damp. The storm clouds broke just enough for a swollen moon to cast pale light across the valley. Her body ached, stiff from stillness. Yet her mind wouldn't rest. Every image circled back, the boy, the girl, her brother's face the last time she saw him. The truth pressed harder. She hadn't missed. She hadn't failed. She had chosen not to fire. And choices had consequences. Footsteps crunched behind her. She tensed, rifle swinging slightly before she recognized the voice in her earpiece. "Approaching from west, don't shoot." It was Rurk. She lowered her weapon, jaw tight as he crept into the shallow cover beside her. Rain dripped from his helmet, his face shadowed by the night. His eyes found hers, sharp even in the dim. "You didn't take the shot," he said flatly. Her pulse jumped, target shifted. "Don't lie to me," his tone cut clean. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the sound of dripping rain filled the space between them. Finally, he said, quieter, "You hesitated." Her throat constricted. She opened her mouth, closed it, then forced the words out. "There were civilians." "Civilians," his brow furrowed. "Children." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, frustration, maybe even doubt. "Command didn't mention children," he muttered. "Doesn't mean they're not there." His jaw worked as he looked back toward the compound. For a moment, he wasn't a captain. He was just a man, carrying the weight of decisions no human should be forced to make. "You know what happens if we miss this chance," he said finally. "You know how many lives are tied to this." Her voice was quiet but firm. "And you know what happens if we stop seeing them as lives at all." The silence stretched again, thick as the damp night air. He didn't argue. He didn't agree. He just looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Not the sniper, not the operative, but the woman behind the stillness. And then he said, almost reluctantly, "You need to decide, fast, because command won't wait forever." Then he was gone, slipping back into the dark, leaving her with her rifle, her ghosts, and the storm echoing in her veins. By dawn, the compound stirred with new energy. Vehicles pulled out. Soldiers mounted guns. Something was shifting. She reported in, words clipped, professional. But she still didn't mention the children. Still kept that truth locked inside. Command didn't want truths that complicated their slides and strategies. The boy and girl appeared again, carrying water this time. She followed them through her scope, heart pounding harder than when she tracked the target himself. And then movement. The high-value target emerged once more, flanked by guards striding toward a vehicle. Engines roared to life. The radio barked, "Target confirmed. If vehicle departs, mission compromised, take the shot." Her throat closed, this was it. Her finger curled, breath slowed. But the boy tripped near the vehicle, spilling water at the man's feet. The girl froze, doll clutched tight, eyes wide. One twitch and she could change the world. One twitch and she could also shatter it. Her hands trembled, just enough for her to feel it deep in her bones. And in that trembling, a memory came back so vividly it stole her breath. Her brother again, this time in the hospital bed. The day they told her he was gone, not from war, not from bullets, but from the silence she'd left behind. He had needed her and she hadn't been there. She had chosen the mission over him, chosen duty over blood. And now here she was again. History folding back on itself, asking her the same question. Who do you save? The radio's voice snapped urgent, execute now. Her cheek pressed harder to the stock. Her eye blurred with wetness, she blinked away. And for the second time in 2 days, she whispered, "Not yet." The silence after her defiance, this time was not forgiving. Her earpiece erupted. "Sniper, respond. Did you take the shot?" She couldn't speak, couldn't form words. "Sniper, confirm." Her lips parted, but nothing came. And in that silence she knew she had crossed a line. The roar of war carried on around her, vehicles, shouting, engines. But to her, it all became background noise. Because in the stillness she carved into that scene, she realized something terrifying. The enemy wasn't just out there, it was inside her. And sooner or later, someone would make her answer for it. The night sky was strangely quiet. No wind, no insects, not even the distant crackle of gunfire. Just stillness. She pressed her back against the cool stone of the ruined building and exhaled slowly. The silence should have comforted her, but instead it weighed heavy, like a warning. Why did it feel like the world was holding its breath? Her finger hovered near the trigger, but she didn't fire. Not yet. The target hadn't appeared. She had been waiting for nearly an hour, muscles burning, eyes fixed on the narrow alley ahead. Every second dragged like an eternity, every heartbeat echoing inside her chest like the thud of boots on hollow ground. She thought about standing down, calling it off, but then the thought cut sharp. This mission wasn't about her comfort. It was about the village she'd passed 2 days ago, the children who had followed her with curious eyes, unaware of the danger creeping toward them. If she failed tonight, their small world would collapse in fire and smoke. Her earpiece crackled. A low whisper came through. "Status." She didn't answer right away. She wanted to, but she was listening, straining her ears past the pulse in her skull. And there it was, a footstep. One, then another, slow, careful. Someone else had learned how to walk with silence. She pressed her cheek tighter to the rifle stock. The air smelled of dust and faint smoke, the residue of a building long destroyed. She adjusted her breathing. One inhale stretched thin, one exhale thinner still. Then movement. A shadow crossed into the alley. Tall, careful, a soldier but not one of hers. He scanned the rooftops, the corners, even the broken glass scattered on the ground. He was cautious, trained. Her pulse didn't spike this time. It steadied. This was the moment she had been carved for. But something shifted. From the other side of the alley, a second figure appeared. Smaller, younger. His weapon hung low, clumsy. He wasn't ready for this world. Her chest tightened. A recruit, barely older than the children she had promised herself to protect. She could take them both. 2 squeezes of the trigger, clean, efficient. The mission would continue, but the second boy's nervous glance, the way his shoulders twitched, tore at her resolve. He hadn't chosen this war. He'd been thrown into it. For the first time in hours, her hands trembled. "Target in sight," she whispered finally, her voice barely audible. "Take the shot." The order was simple, cold, final. but her finger froze on the trigger. The memory rose unbidden. Her younger brother's face, the last time she saw him before his convoy was ambushed. His grin had been lopsided, nervous but alive. He never made it back. She had carried that weight every day since. If she pulled the trigger now, was she protecting lives? Or was she repeating the cycle that had swallowed him? The taller soldier shifted. His eyes scanned higher, sharper, closer to her hiding spot. She knew she had seconds at most. Her breathing quickened, not from fear but from decision. She moved the scope not to the chest, not to the head, but to the rifle slung across his back. One pull, one shot. The crack shattered the stillness. The weapon splintered in half. The man spun, confused, unarmed. The boy froze, wide-eyed, as the sound echoed through the night. Chaos erupted, shouts in a language she didn't fully understand, footsteps pounding. She slid back into the shadows, retreating through the broken halls of the building, heart racing now, not from guilt, but from risk. She hadn't followed the order. She hadn't finished the mission the way they demanded. Her calm hissed in her ear again, louder this time. "What happened? Report." She didn't answer, not yet. Her boots found the crumbled stairs, and she slipped out the rear of the structure. The night air hit her face, cool, biting. She pulled her scarf tighter around her jaw. She wasn't sure what would come next. Punishment, doubt, suspicion. But deep inside, beneath the exhaustion and the fear, a seed of defiance burned. She wasn't here to follow rules blindly. She was here for something else, something that the roar of war could never drown. And as she disappeared into the night, one thought lingered like a whisper against her skin. Sometimes the most dangerous choice was not pulling the trigger. The helicopter blades beat the air like a heavy drum, carrying her away from the broken city. She sat against the metal wall, helmet in her lap, the vibrations running through her bones. Around her, the squad was silent. No cheers, no relief, just the kind of silence soldiers knew too well, the silence of survival without victory. She leaned her head back, eyes closing for just a moment, but the quiet didn't last. In her mind, the roar returned. The roar of war, artillery, shouting, chaos, yet it was muffled now, distant, as if the world itself had grown tired of the noise. What remained was the stillness she had carved into the scene. That one decision, that single hesitation, that refusal to become the machine they wanted. "Why didn't you take the shot?" The commander's voice cut into her earpiece before she'd even left the combat zone. No anger, no accusation, just a question. She didn't answer, not because she didn't know, but because the words would sound too fragile if she gave them air. Instead, she replayed the moment in her head, the boy's face, his trembling hands, the older soldier's startled glance when his rifle shattered instead of his chest. In that pause, just seconds long, she had changed something. Not the war, not the mission, something smaller but just as heavy, herself. The helicopter banked, tilting them toward the rising sun. The light cut through the dust, washing the ruins below in pale gold. She stared at it, unable to shake the thought. How many wars had begun under skies that looked this beautiful? The squad moved around her, adjusting gear, muttering in low voices. One of them, Ramirez, caught her eye. He gave a slight nod, not approval, not judgment, just recognition. He had seen, he knew. She wanted to tell him why. That her brother had once looked the same way, carrying a weapon too heavy for his hands. That every mission she'd taken since was shadowed by his absence. That tonight, she had seen him again in the alley, and she couldn't bear to let history write itself twice. But she didn't speak. The words lived inside her, coiled tight, safer unspoken. Back at the forward base, the debriefing was cold. A room of screens, maps, and tired officers who wanted clarity, not philosophy. They asked their questions with straight faces, pens scratching against paper. She answered what she could: distances, timing, enemy numbers. When they circled back to the decision she hadn't made, she gave them silence. It unsettled them more than any explanation. That night, alone in the barracks, she wrote in her notebook. She didn't write about tactics or orders or missions. She wrote about the alley, the dust, the boy's eyes, the sound of her rifle cracking, aimed not at flesh but at steel. She wrote to remember, not for herself but for someone she might never meet, who one day would need proof that even in war, restraint was not weakness. Days turned into weeks. The war ground on, endless, devouring places and people. Yet something shifted, quietly, subtly, in her squad's eyes, in the way they watched her when orders came down. She wasn't louder than them. She wasn't more decorated. But when she chose to speak, rarely, carefully, they listened. Because she had proven something that couldn't be written into any report. She could stand in the roar of war and carve silence into it. She thought often of the boy. Did he survive that night? Did he vanish back into the tide of the war, or had that one spared moment been enough to give him a different path? She would never know. And that not knowing was its own kind of weight. But it was also a reminder. War was built on statistics, missions, victories. Humanity, however, was built on single moments. Months later, as she prepared for another deployment, she caught her reflection in a cracked mirror. Same uniform, same scars, but something in her eyes was steadier now. Not colder, not harder, just steadier. She realized then what she had become. Not the fastest shot, not the perfect soldier, not the hero in the stories they told. She had become the pause, the one breath in the storm where war's roar bent to stillness. And in the end, that was her legacy. Not medals, not records, just this truth. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't shout. It simply acts. And in the silence that followed, the world was different, if only by a fraction, if only by one spared heartbeat.